When Dark Souls 3 released, I fell in love with From Software games. Because of my love for these games, as I'm sure many people have also felt, I in turn wanted to play Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon, the sixth game of a franchise that From Software, the people who developed Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne and all that good stuff, have made the sixth of this franchise that has been forgotten or lost. Armored Core is a mech game, and that's far from what I've been familiarized with, yet that doesn't take away what the game does extremely well. It has super fast paced, solid combat, and pretty cool progression. However, everything that surrounds the core of Armored Core really isn't for me. But it is a pretty niche game, and maybe you might like it. Starting with the combat, Armored Core 6 excels at giving you fast paced combat with many different ways to approach it. There's a stamina bar that controls how fast you can dart towards enemies, how many times you'd like to dodge before you have to refill the stamina bar, and how long you'd like to stay in the air. This pair alongside having a different bar for your health, your stagger, your enemy's health, your enemy stagger if you're looking at them, the 4 different weapons and their ammo, makes the screen seem incredibly overwhelming at first. However, after a couple hours of tiresome tutorials, it does feel incredibly natural. As a separate bar for stagger would imply, you are able to stun enemies or be stunned by enemies that have weapons that focus on having high impact or stun damage, and you could approach situations with high stun damage, but you don't have to go all in if you don't like, because you do have 4 separate weapons, and you could have a missile in like one weapon slot, a stun baton in another weapon slot, a sword in the slot, and more missiles or a machine gun in the other slot. Or you could go completely all in on a specific playstyle and have everything be a giant cannon if you'd like. You are also able to quickly change your build on the fly whenever you die or whenever you're in between missions, and it really does play into the fantasy of being able to tinker on your mech and customize it. You're able to change the way it looks visually with different colors and then make custom emblems and put things on your mech, and that's like pretty cool for the mech perverts. There was a boss that I spent 2.5 hours trying to beat, and I couldn't until I swapped my build and beat the boss in my next attempt. The game very much seems to encourage you to swap your build depending on the situation. Sure, you could spend like 4 hours trying to fight the boss with the build that you like a lot or the mech that you like a lot. Or you could just like really easily swap your build and kill it in the next few attempts. This sort of playstyle encourages you to think about how you approach situations, maybe more than previous From Software Souls-like titles have made you think about how you approach different situations with the build that you're using. And I think it really does play into the fantasy of having a mech that's ever changing. It's pretty cool. You're able to be super quick and use close range weapons like a sword or a shotgun. You're able to be a literal tank with an arsenal that can defeat anything. Or you can just like fly around and shoot at people from afar with different weapons. All of the variety is great, and I appreciate all being there. And I do appreciate for like falling into the mech fantasy. However, I think I personally am more compelled by fine tuning a specific build that I enjoy a bit more instead of having to swap to a playstyle that maybe isn't necessarily for me. I do understand that's not what this game is attempting to do, though. This style or approach to combat really does determine the difficulty of the game. And I know that difficulty is a common topic when talking about From Software titles, and I think the notion that difficulty is everything in the game is like pretty annoying. But like for the people who are wondering, yeah, the game could be like really difficult if you don't change the build that you're using. And there is a skill, or it is challenging to come up with what type of build is strong against a specific enemy that you are fighting. So you do feel gratification or get a hit of dopamine when you do something right. So that's like pretty nice. It's pretty fun. I should say there were only a few boss fights that really demanded all of my attention and really demanded me to think about changing my build. And it was only that one time that I did change my build. So if you really want to be stubborn like me, you can play the entire game almost, maybe with one build if you're better than me. The game has a pretty linear mission structure. There's a core loop of go to a new place, kill some enemies, loot or interact with different objects, and then fight a boss. The bosses, for the most part, were pretty fucking cool. And I'm sure if you're into the aesthetic of this game far more than I am, you'd probably be even more compelled by all the flashy lights and lasers and worms and robots and stuff. However, the in-between enemies and less than interesting missions which these enemies did accompany left some stuff to be desired. Most of the time, these in between boss fight missions didn't really encourage me or demand all of my attention to be put towards the game. And it was the promise of a boss fight being in the future, which is what pulled me forward to end up finishing the game, not necessarily the core combat against these less than interesting enemies. These less than interesting missions were also plagued with a bunch of over the top and awkward and annoying story moments that I really didn't like. On top of the linear mission structure, there is like two side modes where you're able to fight in arena against NPCs and have 1v1 mech battles that give you permanent upgrades to different or to change how you approach different situations even further. You're also able to have a engage in a PvP arena mode where you're able to do 3v3 or 1v1 battles. And I'm sure to the people who really love this combat, as it is a unique sort of combat system that is done pretty well or even extremely well. I haven't experienced any mech game outside of this one, so take this with a grain of salt. I'm sure if you like PvP and if you like mech game, this game, for that reason alone, might be enough for you to play it. I don't know. And before I forget, there's something I touched on a bit that really needs more of my attention. The story in Armored Core 6, in my opinion, is fucking it's pretty terrible. I'm sure there are people who probably do like this over-the-top storytelling that isn't meant to be taken seriously, but I don't. There is so much uninteresting dialogue that makes me wish I wasn't, or that the story wasn't present at all. You are able to skip it if you'd like, and I'm sure it'd make the experience a bit better for me if I did skip any of the dialogue, but I didn't. And I really don't think you'd be missing out on much if you do skip it. I thought the acting was way too over the top, and the overarching story itself wasn't super compelling to me. Forced to work with bad guys, they want natural resources from this planet. You're harvesting the natural resources from the plant that isn't yours. And then you meet good guys who are like, no, like, don't do that. And you're given the choice to choose missions for the bad guys or the good guys, which then determine which of the three endings you get at the end. If you help the bad guys, if you help the good guys, or in New Game Plus Plus, there's apparently a secret ending. I really don't expect people to play this game for the story, so I don't really want to talk about it too much. And story aside, it is like a pretty fun, it's a fun game in areas for me, and I'm sure that people who are compelled by the core combat itself, maybe the aesthetics of the game, and people who are compelled by the different approaches to combat will be super compelled by Armored Core 6. However, I do think it is a rather niche game, and in my case, primarily the interesting boss fights were what pulled me through the game, and they weren't enough, and the core combat for me wasn't enough to make me overlook all that I disliked about Armored Core 6, which is everything around the sort of heart of it. I'm glad From Software is developing games outside of what they've been recently known for, even if it isn't for me. And I'm sure that people who do love every aspect of Armored Core 6 will be enamored by this game, as there aren't many AAA titles released as of lately that really do fit into this niche. I don't really like the game, but I don't necessarily dislike the game. Maybe you will love the game. Maybe.